facing the ultimate betrayal. My older sister sat across from me with a triumphant smile on her face, sliding a thick stack of legal documents across the mahogany table. She stared straight into my eyes as she delivered the cruel ultimatum she had been preparing for weeks after our parents passed away. Her voice dripped with venom as she declared that the waterfront villa and both stores in Miami belonged to her alone. She made it clear that I would receive absolutely nothing from our parents' estate unless I signed the waiver immediately and accepted a small pity payment. Her lawyer seated beside her tapped his pen against the desk in a slow, rhythmic motion that felt openly mocking. Leaning forward with a look of fake sympathy, he told me that resisting was pointless, that I had no resources to fight them. He urged me to take the money and leave before security was called to escort me out of the building. I stayed silent. No words could capture the burning rage rising inside me at the betrayal unfolding in front of my eyes. Instead of reaching for the pen to sign away my birthright, I calmly opened my worn leather handbag with steady hands. From inside, I pulled out a dark blue envelope, thick-sealed and completely out of place among their pristine white documents. I slammed the envelope down on top of their file with a heavy thud that made them both flinch. The color drained from the lawyer's face the moment his eyes fell on the blue envelope. His hand froze mid-air as if he instantly understood that something inside it had just changed everything. What truth is hidden inside that blue envelope to make a confident lawyer tremble? 1 month before that tense morning in the lawyer's office, the typical gray clouds of Seattle covered the city during the funeral of my parents. The rain fell relentlessly against the black umbrellas while I stood by the grave, feeling like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. While I could barely stand from the weight of my grief, Sabrina stood a few feet away, looking completely detached from the solemn occasion. She did not shed a single tear for the people who raised us, but instead kept her phone pressed to her ear the entire time. I could hear her whispering about property values and market trends to Mr. Pierce, instead of paying her final respects to the deceased. It felt incredibly cold to watch them discuss business over the fresh dirt of our parents' graves without showing a shred of remorse. We returned to the family villa on Lake Washington, where the atmosphere shifted from mourning to hostility almost immediately. Mr. Pierce did not waste any time offering condolences, but instead opened his briefcase to reveal a legal document that looked yellowed with age. He announced with a flat voice that they would be executing a will dated 5 years ago when I was still in college. This old document stated that Sabrina would hold temporary management rights over all assets because I was deemed too young and inexperienced at that time. I looked at them in disbelief because Dad had explicitly told me last month that he was transferring the 2 downtown stores to my name. I tried to argue that our father had changed his mind and promised me those businesses for my future stability. Mr. Pierce looked at me over the rim of his glasses and coldly stated that verbal promises hold absolutely no weight in a court of law. He explained that without a newer written amendment to the testament, the 5-year-old document remained the only valid instruction for the estate distribution. Sabrina did not even wait for the lawyer to finish his sentence before she turned to me with a look of pure malice. She told me that since the house was now under her management, she did not want a freeloader living under her roof anymore. She ordered me to go upstairs immediately to pack my personal belongings because she wanted me out before midnight. I walked to my room with heavy steps while she followed close behind me, like a prison guard watching an inmate. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed to ensure I did not take anything that she considered part of the estate value. I reached for an old wristwatch that belonged to Mom because it was the only thing I wanted to remember her by. Sabrina snatched it out of my hand with surprising speed and hissed that the watch was an antique asset that I had no right to steal. She claimed it needed to be appraised for the inheritance inventory and tossed it carelessly into her own pocket. I packed my clothes into cardboard boxes with trembling hands while fighting back tears of humiliation and anger. The realization that my own sister cared more about objects than our relationship was more painful than the eviction itself. She marched me to the front door and watched as I dragged my life out onto the wet pavement of the driveway. The heavy iron gate slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed loudly through the quiet neighborhood. That sound marked the end of our sisterhood and the beginning of a bitter war that I was not prepared to fight yet. I stood there in the freezing rain for a moment, realizing that I had effectively been orphaned and disowned in the same week. I managed to find a small basement apartment in a rundown part of the city using the little savings I had left. The walls were damp, and the air smelled of mold, but it was the only place I could afford on such short notice. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling while trying to process how quickly my life had fallen apart. The speed at which Sabrina and Mr. Pierce had executed their plan made me suspicious of their intentions. It seemed impossible that they had coordinated everything so perfectly, unless they had been planning this takeover long before my parents died. I could not shake the feeling that they were hiding something significant about the true wishes of my father regarding the inheritance. 2 weeks had slowly passed since the night I was forced out of my childhood home into the unforgiving Seattle rain. I had managed to secure a modest job at a small bakery downtown where the smell of yeast and sugar offered a temporary escape from my reality. I spent my days kneading dough and wiping down tables while trying to forget the sting of betrayal from my own blood. One gray afternoon, while I was cleaning the glass display case near the front of the shop, a solitary figure sitting on a bench across the street caught my attention. The man was hunched over in a way that seemed incredibly weary, yet there was something unmistakably familiar about the set of his shoulders under his worn coat. I squinted through the window and realized with a sudden jolt that it was the family's longtime butler who had practically raised me alongside my parents. I immediately untied my apron and rushed out the door because seeing him there felt like finding a lifeline in the middle of a storm. Mr. Jenkins looked up as I approached, and the sight of his hollow cheeks and tired eyes broke my heart into pieces. He had always been the picture of dignity in his pressed uniforms, but now he looked like a man who had lost everything he held dear. I sat down beside him on the cold bench and took his rough hands in mine, asking him why he was not at the villa managing the household as he had done for over 30 years. He looked at me with watery eyes and revealed the cruelty that Sabrina had inflicted upon him the moment I was gone. He told me that immediately after the iron gate slammed behind me that rainy night, he had tried to reason with Sabrina about her harsh treatment of her only sister. Instead of listening to the man who had served our family for decades, she flew into a rage and fired him on the spot for daring to question her absolute authority. She threw him out onto the street without a single cent of severance pay or even a reference letter for future employment. Hearing this made my blood boil because it confirmed that her greed knew absolutely no bounds or loyalty to the people who cared for us. Mr. Jenkins had dedicated his entire life to our family, and she discarded him like a piece of trash simply because he stood on the side of moral righteousness. Mr. Jenkins lowered his voice as if he were afraid that Mr. Pierce might be lurking behind the park trees to silence him forever. He leaned in closer to tell me about a massive argument he had overheard coming from the study the night before my parents passed away. He said the walls were practically shaking from how loud Dad was yelling at Sabrina about her reckless spending and lack of responsibility. Dad had explicitly shouted that he would not let her ruin the family legacy, and that he was going to change the will the very next morning. This revelation sent a shockwave through me because it directly contradicted the story Sabrina and the lawyer had spun about the 5-year-old will being the final version. The old butler gripped my hand tighter to emphasize the most important part of his story regarding the events of that fateful morning. He vividly remembered opening the door for an independent notary whom Dad had personally summoned to the house to draft a New Testament. However, Sabrina and Mr. Pierce had intercepted the man at the door and sent him away claiming that Dad was too ill to see anyone at that moment. They had effectively buried the existence of that meeting and the potential new will to ensure the old one remained in effect. This was the missing piece of the puzzle that explained why they were so eager to get rid of anyone who knew the truth about their scheme. We sat there in silence for a moment while the gravity of their deception settled heavily around us like the fog rolling in off the bay. It became clear that a new will existed, and that Dad, being the meticulous man he was, would have kept a copy somewhere safe within the house. We knew that Sabrina was too self-absorbed to know about Dad's secret hiding spots, but she would eventually find it if she started selling off the furniture. I looked at Mr. Jenkins with a newfound determination, because we were the only ones left who could honor my parents' true wishes. We agreed right then and there that we had to find a way to get back into the villa to retrieve the evidence before it was too late. That weekend evening, the relentless Seattle rain finally paused to leave the streets glistening under the streetlights as Mr. Jenkins and I decided to follow Mr. Pierce's luxury vehicle. We sat in the old butler's battered sedan while keeping a safe distance behind the sleek black Mercedes as it wound its way toward the waterfront district. My heart pounded against my ribs because we were crossing a dangerous line from being passive victims to active investigators in a high-stakes game. The lawyer drove with an arrogance that matched his personality, weaving through traffic until he pulled into the valet parking of an exclusive seafood restaurant overlooking the dark waters of the bay. This was the exact type of establishment where my parents used to celebrate their business milestones, and seeing their enemies there felt like a violation of their memory. Mr. Jenkins parked his car in the shadows of a nearby alleyway so that we would not be spotted by the valet attendants or the security cameras. We watched from our hiding spot as Sabrina stepped out of the passenger seat looking glamorous in a designer dress that she likely bought with money stolen from the estate. She linked arms with Mr. Pierce and laughed at something he said before they disappeared through the heavy oak doors of the private dining entrance. I knew that we could not simply walk in through the front door without being recognized immediately by the staff or the diners. I told Mr. Jenkins to keep the engine running for a quick getaway while I circled around the building to the terrace area where the private rooms were located. The landscaping was dense with ornamental bushes, which provided perfect cover as I crept closer to the illuminated windows. I moved silently through the wet mulch until I found the specific window that corresponded to the room where my sister and the lawyer were seated. I crouched beneath the windowsill and held my breath as I realized that the sliding glass door had been left slightly ajar to let in the cool sea breeze. The sounds of clinking crystal and animated conversation drifted out into the night air with perfect clarity for my straining ears. I carefully raised my head just enough to peek through the gap in the curtains and saw them raising glasses of expensive champagne in a celebratory toast. Sabrina slammed her empty glass down on the table with a frustration that shattered the celebratory mood and leaned aggressively across the white tablecloth. "The damn old man changed the code to the wall safe in the study before he died," she hissed with venom in her voice. I tried entering his birthday and every other combination I could think of, but the heavy steel door refused to open. Mr. Pierce reached out to pat her hand in a condescending manner and took a slow sip of his wine before responding with a smug smile. "Don't worry, my dear. Once the stores are sold next week, it won't matter if the safe opens or not. The millions from the sale will go directly into your secret offshore account." This revelation hit me like a lightning bolt because it confirmed my suspicion that Sabrina did not know the one combination that mattered most to our parents. My father was a sentimental man who valued family milestones above all else, especially in his later years. I knew with absolute certainty that the code was the date of their 30th wedding anniversary, which we had celebrated just months before the accident. Sabrina did not know this date because she had chosen to skip that party to go on a vacation to Ibiza with her friends. She had completely ignored the invitation and broke Mom's heart, so she had no memory of the significance of that specific day. I possessed the key to the kingdom simply because I had been the one who stayed behind to bake the cake and organize the celebration. I lowered myself back into the shadows while my mind raced with the implications of what I had just discovered regarding the safe. We now had a concrete timeline because we had to act before the sale of the stores was finalized in the coming days. I scrambled back through the bushes and ran toward the waiting car where Mr. Jenkins was watching the entrance with anxious eyes. I jumped into the passenger seat and told him to drive away immediately because we had everything we needed to take them down. We retreated safely into the night with the knowledge that the safe in the study was the only thing standing between us and justice. The target was clear, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt a glimmer of hope that we could actually win this war. 2 days after our covert surveillance operation at the seafood restaurant, I received an urgent phone call from Mr. Jenkins while I was preparing for my shift at the bakery. His voice crackled with excitement over the line as he informed me that Sabrina and Mr. Pierce had just departed for a luxury ski resort in the suburbs to celebrate their upcoming sale. "The house is completely empty, Cassandra," he whispered hurriedly into the receiver. "This is the only chance you will get to retrieve what belongs to you before they return on Sunday." I thanked him for his vigilance and immediately left work to drive toward the wealthy district where my childhood home stood silently in the darkness. The familiar streets of the neighborhood looked menacing under the cover of the night as I parked my car several blocks away to avoid attracting any unwanted attention. I pulled my coat tighter against the biting wind and made my way through the overgrown hedges of the backyard toward the servants' entrance. My hands trembled slightly as I retrieved the spare brass key that Mr. Jenkins had secretly kept for emergencies during his 30 years of service. The metal felt cold against my skin as I slid it into the lock and turned it slowly until the mechanism yielded with a soft click. I stepped into the silent hallway that used to echo with family laughter, but now felt as cold and empty as a tomb without my parents. The air inside smelled stale and dusty because Sabrina had clearly neglected the basic maintenance of the property since firing the staff. I did not dare to turn on any lights for fear of alerting the neighbors or the private security patrol that circled the area. I navigated through the darkness by memory alone, guiding my footsteps along the Persian rugs to muffle the sound of my boots against the hardwood floors. My heart pounded rhythmically against my ribs as I approached the heavy oak doors of my father's private study at the end of the hall. The room remained exactly as Dad had left it, with his reading glasses still resting on the mahogany desk next to a stack of unfinished paperwork. I walked straight toward the large oil painting of Lake Washington that hung prominently on the wall behind his leather chair. I carefully lifted the heavy frame from its hook and set it down on the floor to reveal the gray steel face of the wall safe. This was the moment of truth that would determine whether my knowledge of my parents' love was truly the key to our salvation. "Please let this work, Dad," I whispered softly into the darkness as my fingers hovered over the cold keypad. I took a deep breath and punched in the numbers corresponding to their 30th wedding anniversary, which was the date Sabrina had so callously ignored. The electronic beep that followed sounded incredibly loud in the silence followed immediately by the mechanical whir of the locking bolts retracting. I pulled the heavy steel handle and nearly cried with relief as the door swung open to reveal the hidden contents within. Resting on the velvet lining of the safe was a thick, dark blue envelope sealed with red wax, exactly as Mr. Jenkins had suspected. Beneath it lay a black, leather-bound ledger that contained detailed handwritten notes about the company finances. I opened the ledger to a random page and saw columns of numbers highlighting unauthorized withdrawals made by Mr. Pierce over the last 6 months. This was the smoking gun we needed to prove that he had been systematically draining the company accounts while my father was ill. I quickly gathered all the documents and placed them securely into my waterproof bag to protect them from the relentless Seattle rain. I closed the safe door and spun the lock before hanging the painting back in its original position to cover any trace of my presence. I scanned the room one last time to ensure that everything looked exactly as I had found it, so Sabrina would not suspect a thing upon her return. "Your reign of terror ends this weekend, sister," I murmured to the empty room before slipping back out into the night. I locked the back door behind me and made my way back to the car with the evidence pressed firmly against my chest. The drive back to the city felt completely different from the journey there because I was no longer a helpless victim. I now held the power to destroy their lies and reclaim my family's legacy at the meeting scheduled for the weekend. The fear that had gripped me for weeks was replaced by a cold determination to see justice served. I was ready for the confrontation. The weekend morning arrived faster than I expected, but I walked into the meeting room with a completely different demeanor compared to the weak girl of yesterday. The familiar scent of polished wood and expensive leather in the office no longer intimidated me because I carried the weight of the truth in my bag. I stepped through the heavy double doors with my head held high, ignoring the surprised glances from the receptionist who had seen me crying just weeks before. This was the moment I had been preparing for, since finding Mr. Jenkins on that lonely park bench, and I was ready to end this charade once and for all. Sabrina was already seated at the head of the mahogany table, looking every bit the queen of a kingdom she did not deserve to rule. She sat with her legs crossed elegantly while sipping a cup of coffee, looking at me with half-closed eyes that were filled with disdain. She did not even bother to sit up straight as I approached the table, choosing instead to lean back, with an air of absolute boredom. A cruel smirk played on her lips as she broke the silence with a voice that dripped with condescension. "So, Cassandra, did you come here to sign the papers or to beg me for a few more pennies?" She sneered while inspecting her manicured fingernails. "I hope you brought a pen, because I am not in the mood to lend you mine." I stood silently at the opposite end of the table, gripping the strap of my bag as I watched her revel in her perceived victory. Mr. Pierce sat beside her with a smug expression, tapping his fingers on the stack of documents that would strip me of my birthright. Sabrina took my silence as submission and continued her tirade with renewed confidence. "I already told you that the villa and the stores belong to me," she declared loudly, her voice echoing off the walls. "You have absolutely no standing here. Just sign quickly so I can get on with my life and forget you ever existed." I did not offer her a verbal response, because words were no longer necessary at this stage of the confrontation. I slowly unzipped my bag and pulled out the thick blue envelope that I had retrieved from the wall safe just 2 nights prior. I locked eyes with her and slammed the heavy package down onto the polished surface of the table with a force that made the coffee cups rattle. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room, instantly wiping the arrogant smile off my sister's face. Mr. Pierce frowned in confusion as he reached out to pick up the envelope, his movements slow and hesitant. His face drained of all color the moment his eyes landed on the red wax seal that bore my father's personal crest. His hands began to shake uncontrollably as he realized that this was not something I could have forged in a basement apartment. He broke the seal with trembling fingers and pulled out the document that had been notarized by the independent official whom they had turned away. Mr. Pierce read the first few lines in silence, his breath hitching in his throat as the reality of the situation crashed down on him. I watched the blood leave his face until he looked like a ghost, staring at his own grave. "Read it out loud, Mr. Pierce," I commanded with a voice that was steady and cold. "Tell my sister who really owns the property she is sitting on." He stammered through the opening paragraph, which explicitly revoked all previous wills and named me as the sole executor and beneficiary of the Miller estate. Sabrina's eyes went wide with shock as the words finally registered in her mind. "You are wrong, Sabrina," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Mom and Dad left everything to me because they knew exactly how greedy you truly are." Sabrina let out a high-pitched scream of rage and lunged across the table with her hands outstretched like claws. She tried to snatch the document from Mr. Pierce's hands, to tear it into shreds, desperate to destroy the evidence of her failure. I was faster than her, slamming my hand down on the paper to pin it to the table before she could reach it. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I warned her calmly, "because I have something else that Mr. Pierce might find interesting." I reached into my bag for the second time and pulled out the black leather-bound ledger that detailed every single illegal transaction. I tossed it toward the lawyer, watching as it slid across the smooth wood and stopped right in front of him. He opened it to the bookmarked pages and gasped when he saw his own handwriting documenting the funds he had embezzled from my father's accounts. "That is a complete record of every dollar you stole from the company while my father was dying," I stated matter-of-factly. "It proves that you and Sabrina conspired to defraud the estate long before the funeral even took place." The room fell into a deathly silence as the two conspirators looked at the undeniable proof of their crimes. Sabrina slumped back into her chair, her face a mask of horror, while Mr. Pierce looked like he was about to be sick. "Here is my final offer," I said, delivering the ultimatum that would seal their fate. "You can either accept the terms of this new will and walk away with nothing, or I will hand that ledger over to the district attorney this afternoon. The choice is yours: poverty or prison." 3 months had passed since that explosive meeting in the law office, but my sister refused to accept her defeat with any dignity. Sabrina stubbornly filed a lawsuit with the Supreme Court in Seattle in a desperate attempt to overturn the clear instructions of our late parents. She claimed that the document I found was a forgery and that I had manipulated our father in his final days to rewrite his will. I walked up the marble steps of the courthouse feeling a mix of anxiety and determination because I knew this was the final hurdle before I could truly be free. The gray sky outside seemed to reflect the somber mood of the legal proceedings, but I carried the warmth of the truth inside my heart as I prepared to face her one last time. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension as my new attorney stood up to address the judge with unwavering confidence. He presented the blue envelope and the notarized will to the court, explaining in great detail how it was recovered from the family safe. He pointed out the specific clauses that revoked all previous testaments and highlighted the date which proved it was the most recent wish of the deceased. He called upon the independent notary to testify, confirming that my father was of sound mind when he signed the papers in secret to protect the family assets. The testimony was damning because it directly contradicted the lies that Sabrina and Mr. Pierce had been spreading for months about my father's mental state. My lawyer spoke eloquently about the sanctity of a person's final wishes and how Sabrina's actions were a direct violation of our parents' trust. The judge sat behind the high bench looking stern and unimpressed by the theatrical arguments presented by Sabrina's expensive legal team. He took his time reviewing the ledger I had submitted, which contained the undeniable proof of Mr. Pierce's financial misconduct and embezzlement. The silence in the room was deafening as he finally looked up to deliver his verdict on the validity of the inheritance. He declared in a booming voice that the will found in the safe was the only legal document governing the estate of the Miller family. He dismissed Sabrina's lawsuit with prejudice, stating that there was absolutely no evidence to support her claims of forgery or coercion against me. The consequences for Mr. Pierce were immediate and severe because the judge did not look kindly upon a lawyer defrauding his own clients. The evidence from the ledger was turned over to the Bar Association, resulting in the permanent revocation of his license to practice law within the state. He sat slumped in his chair with his head in his hands, realizing that his career and reputation were completely destroyed by his own greed. He had gambled everything on Sabrina's ability to bully me into submission, and he had lost in the most public way possible. Sabrina looked as if she had been physically struck when the gavel came down to seal her fate in front of the entire courtroom. She not only lost the rights to the villa and the stores, but she also faced a mountain of debt she had accumulated in anticipation of the windfall. I watched as her face crumpled in realization that the loans she took out against the inheritance were now due immediately without any means to pay them. She had spent money she did not have on luxury vacations and designer clothes, believing that the estate would cover her reckless spending forever. Now she was left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back and a legacy of betrayal that would follow her everywhere. I gathered my papers and walked out of the courtroom with my head held high, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. As I walked down the long corridor toward the exit, I heard the frantic clicking of high heels running behind me on the marble floor. Sabrina caught up to me and grabbed my arm with a desperation that was pathetic to witness from someone who used to be so arrogant. She had tears streaming down her face as she begged me to help her pay off the sharks who were coming for her. She invoked the memory of our parents and pleaded that family should stick together no matter what happened in the past. "Please, Cassandra, you can't leave me like this," she sobbed while gripping my sleeve tightly. "I am your sister, and Mom would want you to help me." I looked at her hand on my arm and felt nothing but a cold indifference toward the woman who had tried to destroy me without a second thought. I gently but firmly removed her grip and took a step back to create a permanent distance between us. I told her that she had made her choice the night she kicked me out into the rain and locked the gate behind me. I turned my back on her sobbing figure and walked out into the sunlight, leaving the toxicity of my sister behind forever to start my new life. 1 year has passed since that stormy chapter of my life finally closed, and the rich aroma of freshly roasted coffee once again fills the streets of Seattle. I stood in the middle of our flagship store downtown, watching the morning rush of customers who were eager to taste the Miller family recipe. The business that my sister tried to sell for a fraction of its value has not only survived, but flourished beyond my father's wildest dreams. I invested the profits back into the company to renovate the old roasting equipment and even expanded to a third location near the University District. Keeping my promise to my parents required endless nights of hard work, but seeing their legacy thrive was worth every drop of sweat. I often looked at their framed photograph behind the counter and felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that I had protected what they built. Mr. Jenkins was no longer just a butler who opened doors for others, because I insisted he take a position that matched his wisdom and loyalty. I appointed him as the head of human resources and customer relations for the entire company, a role that allowed him to interact with people who respected him deeply. He traded his old uniform for tailored suits and spent his days mentoring our younger staff members with the patience of a saint. Seeing him laugh with the customers or offer advice to the baristas brought a warmth to my heart that had been missing for so long. He had a comfortable apartment in the city and a retirement fund that I set up to ensure he would never face financial insecurity again. We were no longer just employer and employee. We were the family that we both needed to survive the betrayal of the past. Sabrina, on the other hand, found herself living a reality that was a stark contrast to the luxury she once demanded as her birthright. I heard through a supplier that she was working double shifts at a roadside diner in Portland to pay off the massive legal fees and debts she had accumulated. She lived in a small studio apartment that was smaller than the walk-in closet she used to have at the villa. There were no more designer dresses or first-class vacations for her, only the grinding routine of minimum wage labor and the weight of regret. She had everything handed to her on a silver platter, but her refusal to be grateful turned her life into a cautionary tale of hubris. I did not wish her harm, but I also did not intervene to save her from the consequences she had lawfully earned. I stood on the dock by Lake Washington as the sun set over the water, letting the cool breeze wash away the last remnants of the pain she caused. The house behind me was quiet and filled with love, once again standing as a testament to the truth that integrity will always outlast greed. Before we end today's video, I want to take a moment to step back and reflect on the deeper meaning of Cassandra's journey. This story is more than just a family drama about inheritance. It is a powerful mirror reflecting the consequences of our own choices. Sabrina represents a dangerous trap that many fall into, which is the belief that we are entitled to rewards without effort or gratitude. Her downfall was not caused by bad luck, but by an insatiable greed that blinded her to the value of human connection. She was so focused on the monetary value of the villa and the stores that she completely missed the true treasure of the Miller family, which was loyalty and love. The universe has a way of balancing the scales, and Sabrina learned too late that money gained through betrayal will eventually slip through your fingers like sand. On the other side of the coin, we have the quiet strength of Mr. Jenkins, who teaches us that loyalty is an investment that never depreciates. He lost his job and his home for doing the right thing, but his integrity was the very key that unlocked his future happiness. In a world that often rewards the loudest and most aggressive voices, his story is a reminder that character still counts. Cassandra's victory was not just about getting the money. It was about reclaiming her dignity and protecting the memory of those she loved. It proves that when you stand firm in your truth, even the most powerful lies will eventually crumble under the weight of evidence. I want to hear your perspective on this situation because it is not an easy one. If you were in Cassandra's shoes, would you have walked away from your sister when she begged for help at the courthouse? Some might say that family is everything, and she should have offered a second chance, while others believe that toxic relationships must be cut off completely to find peace. What would you have done if you held that power? Please share your honest thoughts and personal experiences in the comments section below, because I read every single one of them. Thank you for spending your time with me today and following this emotional journey to the very end. If you found value in this story or learned something new about resilience and justice, please hit the like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our next story. Until next time, stay strong and always trust your intuition.